Hello and welcome to News Centre with me, Parikshit Luthra. India's all-party parliamentary delegation comprising of 7 teams and 45 MPs, along with former diplomats, have left for foreign nations in an attempt to expose Pakistan's role in sponsoring terror attacks against India. Delegations will visit 32 nations to engage with foreign leaders and think tanks. The MPs are expected to highlight the impact of the Pahalgam attack, which left 26 people dead, and India's Operation Sindoor, targeting terror infrastructure in Pakistan with precision strikes. The United States urged both India and Pakistan to exercise restraint. US President Donald Trump claimed credit for the ceasefire announcement, but Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri told lawmakers that US had no role to play in the cessation of hostilities between both nations. The ceasefire is holding for now, but what next? And should the US play any role in the conflict when India has dismissed any third-party intervention? Joining me now to discuss all of this and much more is former US National Security Advisor John Bolton. He served in the first Trump administration for a period of 18 months as NSA. Mr. Bolton, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. What has the India-Pakistan conflict, which began on the 7th of May, shown in terms of India's response to Pakistan-sponsored terror?
Well, I think there's no doubt that India has an inherent right to individual and collective self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, which it exercised. It did a few days ago. It did in 2019 when I was National Security Advisor. And I think it's important that India always show that this was a terrorist attack emanating from bases on foreign soil, Pakistani in both cases. To justify what it's doing, but that right, I think, is pretty clear. The question then, obviously, is what happens if Pakistan decides to up the ante, which happened again both in 2019 and this year, and to underline that this is a solution. There has to be a solution to this problem of Pakistan not controlling these terrorist forces on its own territory. I think that's sort of the most important place to start. But there are a number of other issues, particularly raised by this year's attack, notably the role apparently played by Chinese-supplied fighter planes to the Pakistani Air Force, fifth-generation fighters, it appears, and what that means to the bigger picture of strategic stability on the subcontinent and really globally.
Right. India's military response via Operation Sindoor included targeting terror camps in Pakistan, which were the hub and command and control centers of terror outfits like the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Do you think India has sent out a strong message and was able to eliminate the ability of these terror camps to carry out attacks on India?
Well, certainly the response was much more vigorous than in 2019, and perhaps that is the result. I think the fact that, at least as we understand from publicly available information, it was the Pakistani military that ultimately contacted its Indian counterparts to say, let's bring this clash to a halt. Let's have a ceasefire. So it took a little bit longer than it did in 2019. I think people were concerned it might escalate even further, but it did come to a stop, and I think that's important. But I think from India's point of view, certainly, the Pakistani response in the intervening 6 years has not been sufficient, that these terrorist groups are still able to attack and recover from whatever damage was inflicted on them. I've certainly argued, as have other people, that this support for terrorist groups, if you want to look at it that way, or at least acquiescence in terrorist groups operating from Pakistani territory, is not good for Pakistan itself. It's not the world's most stable government, even though in Pakistan they call the military the steel skeleton. It's still at risk of falling to terrorist groups inside Pakistan, which would be bad for that country and bad for the neighboring countries too. So these issues have been there for a long time. That obviously means they're difficult to resolve, but this latest incident proves anything. It's that this cycle needs to be stopped at an earlier point, and that every country has a responsibility to control its own sovereign territory and prevent these kinds of terrorist assaults on its neighbors.
India has said that the progression towards Operation Sindoor began on the 22nd of April when Pakistan-sponsored terror attacks took place and there were civilians who were killed in Pahalgam. The attack involved religion-based segregation, which has been recounted by the victims themselves. What does this show about the intention of the resistance force and Pakistan's role in this?
Yeah, I mean, this obviously has been a continuing source of difficulty, and India has felt the blow of terrorist attacks, not just in Kashmir, but at its own parliament building. So like the United States, which has also suffered attacks from radical terrorists in Southwest Asia, this is a problem that we simply cannot live with, and it's why India's responses clearly constitute legitimate self-defense. I just say I think it's important to get the kinds of information that you've just described, get it out into the world press, make sure that the case that India can make, should make, is important to provide legitimacy for the steps it takes militarily. And I think it's something that the United States government should spend more of its time talking to Pakistan about. We've obviously had a long and complex relationship given the war in Afghanistan. But even the fact that under the Trump plan and the Biden administration withdrew American forces from Afghanistan, this continued threat of terrorist attack out of Pakistan, stemming, many people believe correctly, from elements within the Pakistani military, is not something that can go on for a long period of time. This is the sort of thing that indicates that the influence of China in Pakistan, which is growing, unfortunately, is hardly beneficial to peace and security in the region.
Right. Ambassador Bolton, what we were really shocked by was how US President Donald Trump took credit for a ceasefire even hours before the Indian government could announce that it has had any conversation with US on it. In fact, there is a lot of discomfort within the Indian government that President Trump said that he mediated for the ceasefire to happen. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I wouldn't take it personally in the sense this is Donald Trump at work. This is what he does with friend and adversary alike. He likes to be the center of attention, and one way he can be the center of attention is that he announces that he was the center of the solution. It's not something I think most Americans experienced in national security affairs think is helpful, and indeed I think it can sow misunderstanding. But it wasn't particularly directed against India. He's done it, as I say, to friend and foe alike. So I think in future discussions, it's worth getting the ground rules straight with President Trump at the beginning. I think the fact he made a call, that Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio made calls trying to be helpful was a good thing. I don't want to discourage it, but I think he needs to understand how sensitive this is on both sides, and that in some cases, what goes on quietly out of the spotlight is a lot more important than what happens in the glare of the spotlights.
Do you also think that President Trump has gone ahead to hyphenate India and Pakistan together, as he said that he's spoken to India and Pakistan and told both of them that if they want to continue trade with the US, then they need to stop fighting? President Trump also remarked that he is going to do a lot more trade deals with Pakistan. Do you think that statement by President Trump was insensitive to the Indian government, which is a close ally of the United States?
Well, I think it shows he doesn't know much about the history here. And to him, the part of the problem with Trump is that trade is about all he thinks about, unless forced to think about other things. There's no doubt in any country's foreign affairs agenda, trade is important, but it's important for the economic well-being of the countries themselves. There's no way you can underestimate it. But in the big picture, it's one of several things competing for attention, and we found in efforts to advance the Asian Security Quad in Trump's first term, the idea of Shinzo Abe to have India, Japan, Australia, and the United States cooperate more closely, that we were lucky to get any strategic discussion in at all, and the meetings tended to degenerate. There weren't, I think, but two, but they tended to become trade meetings almost immediately. And I think look, I think Prime Minister has a very good personal relationship with Trump, and that, in Trump's mind, is critical. He sees most of international affairs through the prism of whether he has a good personal relationship with his counterpart in another state. So the prime minister's built up a significant asset there, and it would be worth using that to try and explain to Trump a little bit more of the complexity of what's involved here and the legitimate sensitivities.
Can we still trust President Trump, is the question.
Sure, but what you can trust is he will look for the most publicity he can get out of almost anything. And I was saying you should try and establish ground rules. Don't necessarily have complete faith he'll follow them once you set them. But in this kind of affair, we know that what really triggered the ceasefire was a communication from the Pakistani military to their counterparts on the Indian side. That's the kind of thing done without public attention, and sometimes that can be extremely important. And if the effort at a ceasefire is diverted by public statements by one country concerned about the outcome, it can wreck an awful lot of work that's been done behind closed doors.
Just to speak about China, you've referred to China earlier. What role do you think China played in this conflict between India and Pakistan, and what is the big worry?
Well, I think the biggest news about China out of what just happened is the presence of sophisticated Chinese fighter planes on the Pakistani side. And there's some disagreement about exactly what they did, but a lot of stories about how effective this, what we believe is probably a fifth generation prototype of Chinese fighter planes. And the accompanying information in the public domain that Pakistan may be buying as much as 80% of its sophisticated weapon systems from China, a real reversal from decades ago when much of it was bought from the United States. So I view these indications of increased Chinese influence over Pakistan, particularly on the aerospace and defense side, is very, very troubling. And I think that is something that obviously should be troubling to India as well, given the geography that you face with the shared border with Pakistan on the west of the country, and given what we know about China's hegemonic aspirations all around its periphery. So I think that is something that we need to give some very careful thought to.
All right, just shifting for the moment away from the India-Pakistan conflict, Trump has said that he now favors direct talks with Iran and how they are very close to a nuclear deal with the nation as well. Where does this leave US's traditional ally, Israel?
Well, I don't think they're close to a deal. I think this is salesmanship at work. If they are close to a deal, it would be a duplicate of the 2015 Obama nuclear deal, which was unsatisfactory and Trump was right to withdraw from back in 2018. So my guess is in Steve Witkoff, the president's personal envoy, you have somebody who knows nothing about nuclear weapons, nothing about Iran. I think the Iranians are just out maneuvering him. And my guess is that they're really not that close to a deal at all.
Moving on, Donald Trump has announced cessation of sanctions against Syria during his Gulf tour. He also recognized Syria's new ruler, Ahmad al-Shara. What kind of message does this really send out to U.S. allies?
Well, I think he did it at the instance of Saudi Arabia, which has a grave concern about the potential expansion of Turkey's influence in northern Syria and in the Middle East as a whole, given the Erdogan regime's neo-Ottomanist imperial ambitions. So I can see why the Saudis wanted it, and I think that's an interest the U.S. shares. But Trump made a mistake in lifting the sanctions before he got more indications of performance from Ahmad al-Shara, as you say, the new Syrian leader. He can trim his beard and he can take off his combat fatigues and put on a coat and tie, and he can abandon his nom de guerre and pick up what he says is his real name. That's all well and good public relations, but I would like to see action to show that he's no longer really the al-Nusra Front, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, that he wants to turn the page on terrorism. And there are a number of practical things he could do. Release all the archives and information from the Assad regime about American hostages, all foreign hostages really, that the Assad regime took. Completely open their archives and facilities to international inspection on Assad's chemical and biological weapons programs. and make full disclosure of everything the Assad regime did with Iran during the Assad period in power, including the building of the nuclear reactor Deir el-Zor, a reactor being built by North Koreans, financed by Iran, obviously part of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. That, to me, real concrete action, as opposed to just talk, is what you need to lift the sanctions.
My final question now, what is the biggest threat for India going forward, considering China and Turkey's support for Pakistan?
Well, look, Pakistan is the immediate, imminent threat given the actions of the past few weeks. I think it's really, though, China that's the bigger threat. And I think one course of study in the near term here is the difference between Pakistan's reaction in 2019 and 2025, the growth of Chinese influence. In other words, this is not simply the material contribution China has made to Pakistan's military, but is this an indication of much greater political influence as well? Because I think that would indicate a very serious problem. It would take the Pakistan issue to a much higher, more dangerous level if the Chinese influence is really responsible.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bolton, for joining us for that very important all-comprehensive interview on the India-Pakistan conflict and a preview into Donald Trump's foreign policy as well.